Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Javed Siddiqui. We're going to wait a few minutes just to give everybody a chance to get logged in and settle down, and we'll start it promptly at 2 p.m. Good afternoon again, and thank you all for joining us for the Hunt Institute's December Race in Education webinar. The Institute has committed and has been committed to having honest conversations about the issues of race and culture, and they're embedded in all the work that we are doing virtually and in person across the country. This specific race and education webinar has become a series in which we provide access to people and organizations committed to improving educational outcomes for marginalized and underserved populations. This month, we have a very especially interesting opportunity from our colleagues at the Leadership Academy. Uh, and I'm excited about having one of our dear friends and board member, Nancy Gutiérrez, joining us along with two of our colleagues. I'll introduce all three of them in just a moment. But I'd be remiss not to acknowledge, as you can see from their backdrops, their recently new published publication. Congratulations to all three of you on this great work, and I'm excited about delving into some of your findings and some of your reflections from this piece that you've spent a significant amount of time putting together. And thank you for all three of you coordinating your calendars to be with us at the same time. I think that's going to make for a really rich conversation today. We'll be starting with a few questions for each of our authors, and then I'll be checking the Q&A box to probably halfway along to start engaging our audience in the Q&A with our great authors here. With that in mind, I'll start with Nancy. Nancy is the president and the lead executive officer of the Leadership Academy, which is a nationally recognized nonprofit committed to developing school and system leaders who foster environments where all students can thrive. Under her leadership, the Academy has impacted educators from across 49 states, reaching over 430 districts and educational organizations. Nancy's dedication to equity and community-centered education runs deep. It's rooted in her early experience as a teacher and principal in her own predominantly Mexican-American community in East San Jose, California. Nancy, as I mentioned earlier, is also her influence extends beyond the Leadership Academy. She's on our board at the Hunt Institute, along with several other boards. Namely, she's the chair of the EdLock, Education Leaders of Color. And so Nancy is a force, and we're grateful for her service on our board. And Nancy, thank you for your time, and thank you for taking time to be with us today. I'm also excited to introduce Michelle Jarney, who's been with the Leadership Academy since 2004. Wow, 2004. Currently serves as the Executive Director of Learning and Strategy. Michelle plays a key role in the organization, leading internal capacity building to support the Leadership Academy's sustainability and growth. Notably, she was instrumental in designing the Academy's signature coaching model, a model that has empowered countless educators and leaders across the country. Thank you, Michelle, for being with us. And lastly, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Kim, who has been a key member of the Leadership Academy since 2007. Michael plays a vital role in designing and delivering the Academy's coach training programs, helping to shape effective coaching practices both within the organization and for clients nationwide. He also brings extensive experience as a curriculum designer and facilitator, project manager, and consultant to numerous districts and leadership development initiatives, including the New Leadership Relay for New York City Public Schools, the Leadership Academy's new Principal Intensive, Denver Public Schools, and Chicago Public Schools. Michael, thank you again for being with us, and congratulations to all three of you again on this book. And so with that, let me start with the first question to Nancy, which I'm looking for here. Okay, sorry, Nancy, your commitment to supporting leaders so they can create conditions for all students to succeed and palpable is palpable throughout the book. Given your experience as both a district leader and now nonprofit executive, what what's a pivotal lesson from your own journey that underscores why culturally responsive leadership is essential in today's schools?
Well, first, Dr. Siddiqui, thank you for having us on Institute. So much gratitude, and I'm really honored to be here with my two co-authors. We've spent, you can imagine, writing a book. You spend so much time together. We've already worked together for so many years, and then we spent countless hours putting 20 years of expertise down into this incredible resource. So thank you for creating a platform for us to share. And yeah, I mean, this book is so rich because it really is a tool. And when I think about my own experience and what was meaningful to me, I always think about, in leadership, who does the heavier lift, right? And oftentimes people look at leaders as folks who are all knowing and people who, well, maybe not today's generation, actually. Maybe there's a bit more shared leadership today. But I think when I think about coaching as a tool, I think about coaching as being so essential to the leadership practice. And what we mean by that in this book and everywhere is that that part of being a leader is that you have to build others' capacity, right, to do the work well. And we're not in this book talking only about people who are given a role that says you are the instructional coach, you are the principal coach. We're saying that coaching is essential to every single leader's role. And I think thinking about my experience as a teacher and as a principal and as a district leader, that is something I have carried with me for many years. And in particular, I think about one of my first coaches, right? Like when you're a school principal and you're assigned a coach, and I remember sitting for hours and hours and hours in my office with one of my coaches, and we would talk about everything. He would give me such amazing advice, and I would just write everything down, and I would study it that night. And I mean, and we did this for a couple of years, and I can't say that I really learned much, in the form of applying that learning to my practice. Being talked at, being, for someone to show me what they did, what they would do. All fun, but that's not how we learn, right? As adults. Then I had another coach who said, as soon as he came in, and I expected some of the same behaviors to happen, as he walked into my office, like had some tea, I had some cookies, let's have a seat, let's have a conversation. And he was like, let's go take a walk. Let's go see some classrooms. Let's talk, let's walk. And just started asking me so many questions. I'm sweating over here, Dr. Siddiqui. I'm like, oh man, like these are tough questions. And suddenly I'm doing the heavier lift, right? And the way my practice grew, the way my leadership grew, with a type of coach who really held up a mirror and held me accountable to being my best self was incredible. So that's what you'll find throughout this resource is a tool that really creates a space for an inquiry-driven approach to coaching, which is what we call facilitative competency-based coaching, FCB coaching for short. And so that is what we bring to the table, and that is completely related to my experience, both in what I didn't experience and what I hope for more of.
Wow, thank you for that response, Nancy. Michelle, I'm going to come to you next. The book emphasizes the need for coaching to help leaders develop a culturally responsive lens. In your view, what role does this facilitative competency-based coaching play in helping leaders see and address inequities within their schools? And then further, how do you begin to guide leaders in taking on this critical and sometimes perhaps challenging work?
Well, I actually thank you for the question. I think there's a lot to unpack in there. I think, first of all, I would say I think FCB coaching can play a huge role in helping leaders see and address inequities within their schools, because that's really its purpose. So to start, I think it's really important that coaches and leaders have a clear sense of what their work together is going to be all about right from the get-go. I think as Nancy was alluding to, right, FCB, it's not about helping people become more reflective so they can become happier or more self-actualized humans. It's specifically about developing leaders who have the capacity to ensure that every one of their students gets to learn in an environment that's designed for them to thrive, right? So when you say it can sometimes be challenging, I would offer that that's probably an understatement, right? Because I think it is often really, really challenging work. I think there's joy in it, but it's hard, right? Because there's new ways of doing and being, and it often means having to reckon with truths that are sometimes uncomfortable. And so for us, when we think about like, what does it mean to take a culturally responsive lens and how do we help leaders make change that can really stick? It's about working on the self and the system at the same time. And so for what do the coaches do? Like at the organizational or systems level, I would say they really help their coachees interrogate the practices, right? Interrogate practices and the current state of their schools. So they'll often, that could look like taking a deep dive into the data with their coachees, but not just to explore the data with the coachee, but and see where some of the gaps are and the inequities are, but also to understand how their coachees make meaning of the data. Like, how do they explain it to themselves? What do they pay attention to? What do they notice? What don't they notice? And then there's often, as Nancy talked about, coaches walking the building, right? Observing classrooms. That's a lot of what we expect coaches to do, right? Walk the halls, get into the classrooms, help leaders understand what they're looking for when they're thinking about what culturally responsive instruction could look like, right? How do they give feedback? How do they develop their staff? And then how do they also take, a big part of the work is around systems thinking, right? How do they take a look at root causes, get underneath what they're seeing, think about what are the structures and the belief systems, the mental models that lie underneath what it is that they're seeing, so they know where they have leverage for change. We even include like a diagnostic, right, in the book, because that's a really important tool, we think, for our coaches. And then I would say most importantly is the work on the self too. We, it's really about holding a mirror up, understanding. Coaches will ask questions, give feedback, help to pull out for a leader what drives them in their work, right? What is their experience? How do they understand their own identity, their own experiences? How does that inform their leadership so that they can understand where they have some blind spots, where they might have some biases? And we have a set of leadership dispositions. In fact, our whole chapter 2 is about our leadership dispositions, which really spell out the sort of the mindsets, the behaviors that we think undergird what a culturally responsive leader could look like, right? So a lot of the work for the coach is in asking questions, in giving feedback, and in really helping leaders sort of see themselves within the system and understand the changes that they need to make.
Thank you, Michelle. Michael, let me come to you next. Building on our earlier discussion about facilitative competency-based coaching, let's talk about the learning edge. Coaching education leaders emphasizes that coaches need to balance support and challenge to help leaders reach their full potential. How do you approach helping leaders step into this sometimes uncomfortable but transformative space? And how can coaches use this to balance to foster real change?
Thanks for the question. I think Nancy and Michelle alluded to some of this, right? Nancy shared how, the heavy lifting, right? Who's trying to do that, or how does coaching kind of create the cognitive load so that it's on the coachee doing it? And transforming schools and school systems is really difficult work, and we know that discomfort is inherent. I think the key to coaching, or the key to kind of bringing a coachee to the learning edge, is to prioritize growth over comfort, right? That it's not going to be easy, right? You're not in this to have an easy experience. You're in this to transform outcomes for students. I think another way we kind of describe bringing someone to the learning edge is like you're trying to create inescapable learning, right? How do you create sort of this container or this holding environment, right? I think Heifetz and Keegan have coined that term, right? Where it's a space where it's like safe and supportive enough where leaders can be vulnerable while there's enough pressure and discomfort, right, to actually keep them engaged in the hard work, right, that transforming and dismantling inequities requires. Sometimes people liken it to like a pressure cooker, and I'm not talking about the like Instant Pot that it makes it easy where you could just set it and you forget it. It's actually like the old school, put the pressure cooker on the stove top, you're dialing up the temperature, and you're sort of monitoring, right? How much sort of steam do you need to allow for the cooking to happen? and how do you ensure that enough of the steam sort of releases so that the person in this case, in this situation doesn't feel overwhelmed or discouraged, right? And just shuts down. Again, it's really about creating that heavy lifting and the cognitive load so that the person owns the work, right? Not the coach. Actually, in chapter 5, on pages like 90 to 94, we share about 10 different strategies for coaches to support and to challenge, right? To sort of calibrate and ensure that that holding environment, that container is optimal for learning and growth. I'm just going to highlight, one from each. In terms of challenging, we talk a lot about using silence and wait time, right? Coaches might feel the urge to like fill in silence after they ask a question or give feedback because it can get awkward. But really, you're allowing that time to exist so that you don't rob someone else from their agency of, of growing and, reflection. You're actually allowing them to sort of own the work, right? So effective coaching will ensure that work is really on them. A support strategy is like creating the opportunities to practice. I think Michelle mentioned, like walking, the classrooms and seeing observations, with teachers. You're going to have probably feedback conversations that the school leader is going to have about, what instructional moves might need to be made. Coaching can provide that kind of space and opportunity for people to practice. What might my phrasing have to be, right? How do I sort of get behind the eyes of this teacher to ensure that they understand my feedback? What do I need to be cognizant of? What triggers might sort of impact me in my conversation? So allowing people to practice and to role play, I think is something that a coach can do to sort of alleviate some of that discomfort and challenge, because it's really about things not being practiced, more so than it's just being hard. So I would say those are the two things that I would highlight here. There's more in the book, but really it's the coach's job to calibrate sort of the amount of heat or pressure for the optimal amount of growth to happen.
I'd love to add, if that's okay.
Yeah, please, Nancy.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. Michael, spot on, as always. And I was thinking as you were speaking about you talked about chapter 5, about what's one of my favorite chapters, because it's really about like what do you do as a coach, as a supervisor, right? As a person where your job is to build others' capacity when you have really amazing leaders, right? Like there's this myth, and it's always been, it's either if you need a coach if you're a brand new leader, right? You get it for the first year, districts say coaching for all, or maybe 2 years and they're like patting themselves on the back. Hey, this is awesome. Now everyone gets, but really it's a lifelong process. It's a process that develops. You continue to develop yourself over time. And I've been in situations, as a coach where someone who is exceptional in their role is assigned to me or is asked, or asked for me as the coach. And chapter 5 really, as Michael described, really talks about ways to continue to keep people at their learning edge. And there is a range of needs that folks will have across the system in service of our young people. But I love that chapter in particular because I think it pushes the coach also, in addition to the coachee, to really keep each other, learning, which is exactly what coaching is.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for adding that. All right. This is a quick reminder. I see some questions are coming in from our audience. So please, I'm going to have one question I'll ask for the whole group, all three of you to respond, and then we'll get to some of the Q&A from our audience. The book describes coaching to help leaders grow personally and professionally. What are some of the biggest changes you see in leaders when they go through this coaching process? And given Nancy just jumped in, I'll start with Michelle, and then we'll come back around to Nancy with Michael in between. So, Michelle, any thoughts there?
Yeah, what do we see? I think often we see leaders who are more willing to give feedback, hold themselves and others accountable. I think we often see more action, right? And even if there's not necessarily, sometimes it's less fear and more action, but even when there is still trepidation, there's still action. I think we see leaders being clearer in their expectations. And there's something Michael talked about, the comfort level, right? I think we see leaders who are more comfortable with discomfort, right? Less avoidant of discomfort, and willing to learn maybe more publicly than they otherwise would. And I'll pass it to my colleagues, see what they think.
Michael, would you like to jump in next?
Sure. I'll add that I think because the coach really starts to help the coachee develop sort of a habit of reflection, you start to see the coachee begin to ask themselves the questions that the coach would ask, right? Things like, what might be some of the unintended consequences and the leadership implications of my decision making or my actions, right? So they begin to internalize more of the kind of reflection, the habits of adaptive leadership that we're trying to work toward. And I think that's a key sort of growth area that we see as coaches. As coaches.
I would add, and I think this is actually your question, Dr. Siddiqui. I think is really aligned to Antonio's question in the Q&A too, just around like what would you see, what are observable behaviors, and we would refer you once again back to chapter 2. I feel like I feel like everyone's going to buy it just for chapter 2 because we've mentioned it like 4 times already. But really, there are 6 dispositions, as Michelle mentioned earlier, that we consider observable behaviors in service of equity, and really the North Star to how we expect behaviors to shift over time. The first 3 have to do with self and the deeper reflection that I think we're referring to, and the being self-aware of of how your decisions are going to impact and be, young people, or as a nonprofit executive myself, how it impacts everyone across the org. So and then moving into the other 3, which really are about systems change. If coaching is successful, you see it, as Michelle said, not only in self-enlightenment and actualization, but you see systems shift in service of the needs that are presented within that context, in terms of the problems that we are all, saying this is something we need to solve together. We believe that coaching actually works in service of solving those problems. I also think, one other key measurable behavior is disposition 4, around you see them starting to coach others. So not only, as Michael said, are they asking themselves the same questions, they're coach. I mean, so I have the opportunity and the honor of having Bob Keegan, coaching guru, as my personal coach. And I do, even in my daily life, I'm asking myself the questions he would have, like, what would Bob ask me? What would he ask me in this moment? Like, coachees start to do that as well as part of the practice. And then you see them start to use these coaching strategies to coach others. And what that means is that they are building capacity of others, and that they are creating space for others to grow and to learn. And they are recognizing that leadership at all levels is about continuous learning, and not about having all the right answers all the time. So in essence, you're creating a culture of learning across the entire organization through coaching.
Nancy, I would say even in addition to that, right, not just building capacity, but I think we see leaders better able to inspire and engage others, right? I think they become sharper coalition builders and strategizers. I think they're better communicators. And by that, I don't mean not just in what they're communicating, but better listeners. And I think connected to sort of being culturally responsive, I think we see less of leaders assuming that their way of seeing something is the only way, as well.
I was just giving the appropriate pause and seeing Michael want to jump in. I suspected you all were going to play off each other really well. So, Nancy, you mentioned the question from our guest here. So let me come to his question, because I think we sort of laid the groundwork for it. But he ends his question. Antonio ends his question with how can we directly measure the impact of effective coaching? What reflections or insights do you all have to maybe address that? And how do you determine the impact? How do you measure that?
It's a great question. I'd love for us to just have a conversation here really publicly about that, because coaching in and of itself should be a one-on-one conversation, coach and coachee. There's a lot of confidentiality that comes in that relationship, a lot of trust building, to be able to say, hey, like, here's where I'm struggling. Hey, I don't know how to do this. Hey, here's, what I'm thinking, or, I noticed this about myself, something I'm working on. One of my goals, for example, with my coach currently is around leading with vulnerability, and with that goal comes a lot of more vulnerability, right? So, I think the measurement could be, happen in multiple ways. One is the self-assessment of the coach themselves. One is the coach giving the coachee feedback. We've also done 360s, where you get the opportunity to hear from all of your colleagues, up, down, across the organization to really hear more about how you're doing and assess that over time. But it really, as Michelle said at the very beginning, the coaching relationship should start with the goals. Like what are we trying to achieve? Where are we headed? And what is it in service of? And it should always come back to that point, that focal point, as a real guiding star to measure the success of the coaching relationship. And I'll open it up to Michelle and Michael, because I'd like to just keep exploring this, because it's a great question, and I think it can go a variety of ways.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I think goals for sure, right? To the extent to which the leaders were able to achieve the goals that they set out, and the degree to which they think their coach had something to do with that, I think is one perhaps easy way. There's ways of having leaders or coachees sort of self-assess their own growth over time, right? And we have several tools we sometimes use around that. I think where it gets a little bit more complex, but I think is really interesting, is where others see the changes in the leader's behavior, right? So if we're working with the principals, say, like, how are teachers experiencing the principal's leadership over time? Could be a way, right? It's complicated, as Nancy said, right? So, but ideally, we'd want to see, changes in both the structures perhaps at the school and the behaviors at the school that ultimately, will impact on what happens with students at the school. But that's a long, right? There's a lot of steps in between the work that the coach does with the leader and ultimately seeing the outcomes for students. There's a connection to that, but it's hard. It becomes harder to measure the capacity of the coach, right? Using something so far away from their own practice.
Yeah, just to keep this conversation going, Michael, and I'm going to invite you in with this, but
Yeah.
just sort of guide it.
I'll just add a little bit more to what Michelle said, because I think, we're talking about, like, how do we connect, let's say, a direct line between coaching and, let's say, student achievement, right? Or like outcomes in classrooms. That's really, really hard. We've been at this for about 20 years, and I don't think we've had one clear answer. I think one thing that we've learned is, like, how do we connect sort of like the theory of action, let's say, that the leader is working towards, in terms of the goal, right? What is the leader going to do, and how is that going to impact, let's say, the teachers that they are sort of overseeing and supervising and supporting, and then in turn, what are those teachers doing in the classrooms and working with the students? And we sort of try to connect it to, well, how is the coaching, right, going to actually help the leader engage in those actions? So that's one way we try and get as closely to that sort of direct line, because it is hard. We're a few steps removed, likely. And again, with the 360, I think Nancy mentioned earlier, there's usually like a pre and post, right? So before coaching, you might take a 360. And what we mean by 360 is, like, you're not just giving self-perception. Your peers might be giving you feedback. Your direct reports might be giving you feedback. Your boss, might also be giving you feedback. And so you have this composite report on how people are perceiving your leadership. And then, 12 months later, 6 months later, we can sort of assign a different time as you work through coaching, but, like, how are those perceptions different, right? What are the ways in which people are experiencing leaders that are different now as a result? We can use as another sort of indicator of the impact of coaching.
I'll add just a little bit more there. We've been talking a lot about kind of coaching the principal in service of the classroom. We also do a lot of coaching at the executive level. We do coaching of, executive teams, superintendent's team, board members, people across the central office, principal supervisors, and always within these schools, within education, it's always in service of young people. And there are ways, the assessment, the impact, might look different. If, for example, with the 360 process, you might ask 12 people across, up, down, and across to say, give me feedback. And it's very in depth. I mean, Michael, how long does a 360 take? I mean, I remember giving people feedback that took me hours. Is that,
I think we've shortened it probably to about, like, between 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how thorough someone wants to, provide that kind of feedback. But that's certainly a gift that people provide for, anyone taking it.
Absolutely. And so there are times too with, executives, like people at the highest levels, where maybe the assessment impact might be a survey that goes out anonymously. That's a stop, start, continue. You know, what do you want me, to stop? What do you want me to start? What do you want me to continue? And like quick answers that take 5 minutes, that are anonymous, that give you that feedback, and that are frankly sometimes, as Michael talked about earlier, really hard or uncomfortable to hear, but that helps guide your thinking about where you are in your process of meeting the goals that you had set forth for the coaching practice at the beginning.
I sort of want to take this question just in a little bit of a different direction too, because the other piece is not just assessing sort of the impact of coaching, but assessing the coaching practice itself and really being thoughtful about developing the practice of coaches. And so one of the things that we included in the book is also what we believe coaches need to know and be able to do. Like what we've actually broken down the practice of coaching to very discrete behaviors as well for the coach. And so, we have both done this ourselves in our own direct service coaching work and helped other, states and districts and systems around the country build the capacity of coaches. And that is a lot of work in terms of really just observing coaches and using those coaching sort of what the pieces, we call them KBADs, right? What coaches need to know and be able to do as a way of being really explicit about the moves of a coach and giving feedback there too.
So thank you for that. I mean, I knew we were sort of going to be riffing off each other, but let me take two questions that have I want to sort of package two questions that have come in from Celia and Janita. What are some of the characteristics you believe a leader should exhibit to demonstrate cultural responsiveness? And I guess before we answer that question, maybe one of you could you elaborate on what you mean when you say a culturally responsive approach?
Forgive me, I'm back to chapter 2, but this is, it's great questions. So thank you for those questions. First, I just want to name that as part of culturally responsive coaching, you can't, even with all the skills of an effective coach, the question asks, you ask the right questions and you provide the right wait time, you do all of that. If you don't take your identity into consideration as part of the coaching practice and the identity of the coachee into consideration as part of the coaching practice, you've missed that part about it being culturally responsive. And so we explore identity and how that plays into the coaching practice throughout the book. And in chapter 2 in particular, I'll go back to those 6 dispositions that Antonio asked about earlier about like measurement. We say like, if you want to, we call them our equity leadership dispositions, and we find those to be the North Star of adult leadership behavior and practice, and we are coaching in service of those to make sure that young people have what they need. And so I invite you to look at those 6. And at the beginning, we kind of set up a scenario, kind of an imagine. If I want to read a couple of lines from it, and this is on chapter 2, page 29, and it opens up with like kind of a vision of what a culturally responsive space could look like, sound like at all levels. Reason being, we need to know what we are coaching in service of. Back to that, right? We can't just coach to become better people, to be self-actualized. And I'll just kind of skim different parts, but it says, imagine walking into a classroom where students' identities are affirmed, reflected in the curriculum, where students are held to high expectations, given the support they need to access grade level, rigorous content, goes on. The next paragraph is around imagine speaking with families and community members who feel like real partners, to teachers, to staff members, where the experience of school is responsive to their needs, keeps going. The next one is around the leader. Imagine meeting the principal who embodies the leadership dispositions necessary to shift practice, who coaches teachers, who builds inclusive and rigorous classroom environments and community spaces, And it moves then into the central office, talking about how, imagine walking in there and seeing a central office or a system that prioritizes capacity building as core, prioritizes learning as core to the environment and invests in their adults. And one that takes a strategic approach to cultivating the type of school leaders they want for their own kids, right? So this is what we mean by creating culturally responsive systems. For us, it's not just about the classroom, not just about the school, but it's about the ecosystem, right, of being responsive. And we do, and when we talk about the responsive coach, we are talking about a coach who is working with leaders in service of that vision. And I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a picture of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's helpful, I think. Michael and Michelle, I just want to make sure, pause to make sure you didn't want to add anything.
I think the only thing I would add is I think a culturally responsive leader is somebody who's done the self work, right? Understanding, as Nancy said, their identity and also how sort of the systemic oppression or institutionalized racism has either impacted them and impacted the lives and the families of the children that they work to support, and that takes an active and a very intentional approach in mitigating those and dismantling those.
Okay, another question here from our audience. This is a great question. It's our friend Kim, Dr. Bridges. The coaching role in K-12 has seemed to explode in recent years, and she's observed a pattern of good teachers getting moved into these roles with the assumption that if they know how to teach students, they know how to coach adults. What are y'all's suggestions for shifting this pattern within districts?
Very common, very common. What is you know that if you are good in one role, you know how to coach for it is not necessarily true, right? So being a good teacher didn't mean that I could step out and automatically coach teachers. People could come see me teach, and they did, right? But there's a skill set that has to be developed as part of that. So I think it's a mindset shift. And this is this Dr. Kim Bridges. Like, I think this is my buddy too. Hey, Kim. This is something that's commonly we move people into new roles without sufficient training. And by the way, we're available to support with these processes anywhere, because there is a specific skill set that has to be developed. I remember so many people wanting me to coach them, and I had to acknowledge that I didn't actually know how to coach. I knew how to run a great classroom. I knew how to run a great school, all of those things, but the coaching practice itself, I was on the phone with Michelle Jarney. Michelle Jarney, can you coach me? Can you coach me, coach? And I had to really learn and develop those skills and get really honest feedback to continue developing. So in terms of breaking the pattern, I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement that what got you here won't get you there, and really investing in building your people, creating spaces of learning, and acknowledging that that role requires deep skill. What did I miss, co-authors?
I think you said this, but I think just really recognizing what the role entails and what for districts to understand what they want to prioritize, and even potentially thinking about that in as part of the hiring, right? Like, how do they test for somebody who can, let's say for leaders, right? Like really create transformational learning experiences for teachers, really be able to build their capacity to facilitate their learning. I think it's really, really important.
So Nancy, Michael, I see you came off mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit more, I think we also see a trend where, just because you're a successful principal, right? And you get placed in like the developer of other principals, right? Or like this coach of principals. So I think that trend is like all the way through the sort of system of education. I think, back to Michelle's point about the hiring, I think the way to stop that is to see or to make sure that like you're also making sure that coaching is about bringing the best out of another person. It's not about creating sort of, Michael Kim 2.0 or the best version of myself or replica of myself. You're actually trying to draw the best out of the other person. And I think you can see that through the interview questions. You can see them through like a role play or a simulation. So I would say, as you if you're in the hiring process, in the recruiting process, you can actually create sort of the opportunities to see people's stances, right? And are they reflective enough to be able to see and recognize when they're sort of getting in their own way because they're not really coaching, they're just mentoring, right? Or they're just actually trying to create a replica themselves.
And one way to do that, if, for example, you're hiring for someone to manage school principals, like take your candidates on a walk, have them visit a school, have them walk with the principal, listen for the questions they are asking. It doesn't mean it's a deal breaker. Be like, all right, you're not a natural coach, forget it, you're done. It's more like, hey, here's what where I have to build the capacity. Here's something I see I have to invest a little bit more in to make sure this is a successful relationship. But there, and Michael, I love the idea of role plays, like right there. I know that in our interviews, we do that all the time. It's like, let's give you a scenario and let's jump right in. And let's create an environment here where this is happening and you are in that coaching role. And again, I want to remind everyone that we truly believe it's not just people who are assigned the role coach. We believe that if you are an effective leader, you are a coach automatically, that is something you are responsible for, is building the capacity of others. And one very key way to do that is by coaching your team.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something that you just said, Nancy, because I actually think most of the greatest coaches that I've ever encountered, I wouldn't know if they were natural coaches or not. I think it's very learnable. And I think it also involves some unlearning, right? We've worked with lots of people who've transitioned from the role, whether it's from a superintendent or from a principal, into the role of coach. And a lot of what Michael said is true. We really have to sort of help them unlearn the tendency to want to be the leader, right? Because it's not about them. So really taking that approach of facilitating the learning of somebody else, so they're the ones doing the work, is key. And the other thing that is so important for people to learn when they're learning how to coach is not to be afraid of the discomfort that comes with that learning process, both for themselves and for the coaches that they're working with.
So, it wasn't 10 years ago, 5, 10 years ago, maybe, that if a building leader or district leader would say they had a coach, typically the coach would have been assigned to them for some not so great reason. So I think there's something very really cool. I think, Nancy, you're modeling it. I think we need to do a better job modeling that everyone benefits from having a coach. It's something new for me, and in the past 2 years, I actually have a coach now. They're a great thought partner. Carl Anthony has a really cool question, though. As we sort of destigmatize the coaching and the value of coaching and the dynamic between coach and practitioner, if the coach is also the supervisor or evaluator, how do you go about navigating that relationship? What are your collective thoughts here?
First of all, hey, Carl Anthony. Glad you were here with us. It's interesting because if you are the evaluator, we would argue that majority of your job is still being a coach. Right, yeah. And there should really be no surprises. If you are having honest conversation, if you are pushing people to their learning edge, if your coaches / your employees are able to begin asking themselves the same questions you would ask them over time, when you get to the part about evaluation at the end of the year, the formal conversation or write up, there should be no surprises. If there are surprises there, and I would love to hear what Michael and Michelle think, but I would argue that you're probably not having as authentic of learning of conversations as you should throughout the year. Probably not asking the right questions. You're probably not creating space for the right level of reflection, because again, as Michael said earlier, folks should be able to write their own at the end of the year if that relationship is authentic and very vulnerable throughout.
I think it's important for supervisors and for coaches, right? Is to create enough psychological safety where the person that you're working with is able and willing to be vulnerable with you about where they feel they need to grow and where they're finding challenge or what they're concerned about or what they're afraid of. And so I would think that would be true from both the supervisor and the coach lens.
Michael, anything you want to add here?
Not at this moment. I think Michelle and Nancy covered this one.
It's another question we have here from Susan is, do you all, or have you observed increased confidence throughout the coaching relationship? If so, is there any evidence you could cite or offer?
That's a great question. It reminds me of, and Susan, I'm going to take this on a little bit of a tangent and we'll come back. Okay. But it's reminding me a little bit of, this other myth that I think we hear a lot about, like, I can't really coach until I develop a deep relationship, until I develop a lot of trust with my coachee. And we would say the opposite. We would say you start coaching right away and the trust is built through the coaching relationship. Connecting that to confidence, I think it depends on the person, right? It depends on, the goals that are set from the beginning. I think we do see it when a goal is set, we're on the same page about what we're trying to achieve, what we're coaching in service of. And there's a home run, right? Someone hits a home run and it's, they get a win and they're like, wow, and it goes back to the beliefs versus practices debate. Do you need to see practices happen first to believe that something can happen, or do you start with kind of beliefs? And I think throughout the coaching process, one thing we have found helpful is when we do short cycles also of coaching to achieve certain goals throughout. And I would say confidence as a byproduct, probably not as something that that is core to our leadership equity dispositions, but is something that could happen as part of the process. Michelle, Michael?
I'm looking for the original question and I apologize. Can you repeat the
Yes. Do
question?
you observe increased confidence throughout a coaching relationship? If so, what evidence can you cite?
Increased confidence on the part of the coach or the coachee?
I took it as the coachee.
That's the way I would encourage you to think about it.
On the part of the coachee. What does it look like? Yeah, in fact, I think those were some of the things that I was thinking about when coaching is successful, right? Is like the willingness to be a public learner, I think is often something that we see. And I think that comes
Great
with
point.
confidence,
Point.
and perhaps willingness to take risks. I think, Nancy, you were also alluding to, how we often, both in our own coaching and help others, really help leaders figure out, like, well, so what's the next step you can take, right? We're always moving the bar just a little bit. So doing one more thing than you're comfortable with, and we see that increasing with, I think, in really successful coaching relationships, people's willingness to take those kinds of risks.
All right, I have another question here from L.A. Almonte. Question is regarding specific about the coaching model. Are the practices aligned to ICF, and I assume they're International Coaching Federation? Michael, I see you nodding. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. In chapter 1, we sort of go through all the components of our facilitated competency-based coaching, and as Michelle referenced, our like coaching know and be able to do is our KBATs. And I think if you look at those and you look at the ones that ICF has, you'll see a lot of alignment. We've had training from Minds at Work. We've I think borrowed a lot also from ICF. So I think there's going to see a lot of alignment across both frameworks. I don't know if Michelle or Nancy have anything else to add about that, but I think it's pretty straightforward.
The only thing I would add to that, yeah, that's a great thank you, Michael, is that as part of, this is a practice we've been doing for 20 years, right? As FCB coaching, at one point, we were the sole provider for New York City doing FCB coaching for, every new principal across across all 1,800 schools. And we have done a lot of learning too. So even though it's 20 years of experience and expertise, we continue to draw expertise from ICF, from Keegan's Immunity to Change model, from Bloom and Wilson's blended coaching, from Milena Aguilar's coaching for equity. Those are the types of things you'll see. A lot of that thinking we pay tribute to so many of the coaches who have expertise in this area. So you will see alignment across as we have continued to be learners ourselves.
All right, this is a interesting question from Edwin, and I personally have some thoughts here, but I want to hear what you all have found in the field in regards to Edwin's asking for recommendations to address coaching across lines of difference. What are some essential skills needed to ensure that the coach can be effective when coaching someone that is different than you? I'll open it up to whoever wants to jump in first here.
Michelle, I see you.
Oh, you know what? Because I
Edwin.
actually thought Michael was going to want to.
Michael, why don't you kick us off? Yeah. But Edwin Quesada is our former super from Yonkers and a good friend of ours. So hey, Edwin.
Yeah,
Now
I'll get started, and I'm sure Michelle and Nancy will jump in more. I think that's a not to go back to chapter 2 again, right? But I think the dispositions are so important here, right? Because I think this speaks to, coaches also being culture responsive leaders, right? Like you yourself have to be a culture responsive leader as you sort of work to help someone else become culture responsive as well. And I think I'll just highlight the first equity leadership disposition. And it's about reflect, right? Reflecting on personal beliefs, biases, assumptions, and behaviors, right? If you yourself aren't doing some of that self-work, right, then you're operating with so many assumptions or mental models about what the other person might be thinking. And that can be very, very dangerous, right? So I think part of it is to ensure that you have a sense of curiosity. You are ensuring you're doing your own self-work. I think recognizing that there is a line of difference, I think, is step one. But like, how does that actually play out when you are, examining a classroom together, right? Or sort of unpacking a situation, right? It's sort of this reflective pause that you build in place, I think, to ensure that that's not getting in the way, right? Because I think you're trying to operate from the person's meaning making, right? You're not trying to interpret and add sort of more meaning or layer it onto a situation. You're trying to understand how the other person's making sense of it. So I would say sort of the self-work is most important, and I would go back to that first disposition. And yeah, I'm sure Michelle and Nancy can jump in with more, but that would be step one for me.
I mean, I think we encourage coaches and coachees to talk about identity and lines of difference and lines of similarity from the get-go as part of nurturing an authentic relationship with their coachees. And that is embedded within not just our dispositions, but also those coaching KBADs of really being, we expect leaders to they're not waiting until the coaching relationship is halfway through before they're starting to talk about aspects of identity, and grappling with those. And right from the very beginning, there should be open and honest acknowledgement around like where do our identities where do they differ? Where do our experiences differ? What are we each bringing to the table in this conversation? How does a coach create space for the coachee to bring their whole selves in to the relationship? And so I think that's really important. And we often, when we're doing matching, also we try to, in cases if we're doing matching or we're helping a system think about coach matching, we might do like a questionnaire or something ahead of time, so we get a sense, a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of the individuals that we're working with, and so to be able to take into account some of their preferences for not just lines of difference in terms of identity, but how do they like to learn? How do they like what are they all about, so that we can take that into consideration when possible in the matching process.
The only thing I'd add is, if I think about one of the things I love best about this entire resource, it's all the questions it gives you to ask during the coaching process. And so you'll have some of these, to your question, Edwin, you'll have some of these, like I'm reading page 32, you're asking the coachee, how do the intersections of your identity impact your leadership? How are your students are the students experiencing what you experience? How do they align? How do they differ from your own experience in schools? All those things that really help to unpack who we are. And certainly, as Michelle and Michael said, we encourage in all the ways to bring up and to surface the way your identity plays into your leadership and into your coaching practice, into either giving or receiving feedback as well as part of the process. So you'll find a lot of great nuggets within the book to ask and to create that space for conversation.
This next question, and I think many of you are familiar with our campaign that we do in collaboration with several other partners. 1 million teachers of color. There's an underpinning there of 30,000 school leaders of color. And we're in a time now where some of these things are being sort of pushed aside, and maybe we don't speak of them. They're spoken in covert ways, or they're intentionally attacked. This next question is several districts that have not prioritized culturally responsive teaching or coaching system-wide. How do we achieve effective coaching models around these leadership dispositions when it's not valued or rewarded or sometimes even acknowledged as key to transforming a school? maybe this is a good way to sort of start winding down our webinar, because this is a question that gets to some of the sort of societal times we're in right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I'm thinking, so the dispositions, I think, so one of the tools we have on our side, I think in general, is taking the space to define, right? When we actually define what we mean by some of these terms that could consider to be that might be triggering for some, we might not be too far off from what we think. For example, we could say the word equity, or we could say, let's make sure every student gets what they need to be successful. Not a lot of people are going to argue that every student should get what they need to be successful. One thing that's wonderful about our dispositions, they're so easy to grab onto. We use very plain language. And I know we're running out of time here, but just to take you through our dispositions, I'm on page 31 for those of you who have the book in front of you. But the first one is around, reflection. The second one is around modeling your beliefs, right? You can do the reflection, but then are you actually publicly stating your beliefs and modeling that for others in your leadership? And are you acting? Are you understanding what it means to catch yourself in real time in decision making? As you engage in leadership decisions. Number 4, are you building capacity of your team, of others? Number 5, are you confronting bias? In New York they say, when you see something, say something. Yeah. Every time you're on the subway, the notice comes, are you doing that? If you're seeing something that's not okay, are you naming it in real time? And the final one is around creating systems that will outlive your tenure as the leader in that space, that you will create in service of your current students and generations to come. And so the reason I went through all 6 briefly is because I don't find any of that to be triggering. I find that to be plain language around, are you building capacity? Are you reflecting? Are you creating systems? When we actually define what we mean by this work, and then I think we're able to drive there together through the coaching practice in a way that is healthy and is centered, and it's my hope it doesn't create a lot of fear within systems, that it could actually just create really clear, tangible goals to achieve.
Michelle, Michael, anything either one of you want to add?
I think she got it.
Okay. Well, let me let's end with this. What is something, I always think this is a cool way to end these types of conversations. What's something small but impactful that can help build a foundation for a more inclusive and equitable environment? Why don't we start with Michael, Michelle, and then we'll end with Nancy.
I think a really powerful question that I've been asked and I've also used in coach training sessions is like, who are you protecting? And or maybe who are you centering? And so I just want to say that, I think sometimes the focus on coaching is so much on like the adults, right? But I think you have to keep kids and students at the center. And that question for me has always been helpful. So I think a leader can ask that question of themselves. I think a coach can ask themselves as well. If a coaching session was only centering sort of the leader or the coachee, right? Or sort of geared so that it's really about transforming, the student experience. So I would say that question has been really impactful for me as like a guide, right? Or like a North Star, making sure that I'm sort of calibrated and going in the right direction. And I'll turn it over to Michelle.
So Michael, it's interesting you were talking about centering students, and I agree with that. I think for me, I would offer implicating oneself, right? So the one small thing would be, so what part of this do I have agency to change? Where am I implicated? What's my role in this? And then what does that call on me to do? And so I guess, Nancy, I'm passing to you.
I would say that if you are a leader and coaching is not a key part of your practice, ask yourself why. And it doesn't mean you got the job as the instructional coach. It doesn't mean that coaching is formally in your title. If you are a leader, you are a coach. If you are having check-ins, one-on-ones with your staff members, if you are visiting, take a coaching stance. The good news about this book is that it gives you so many different ways to do that, so many questions to ask, depending on who you're working with. Chapter 6, in fact, what I love about the last chapter is it gives you kind of start to finish, what we call CPR squared, like how do you begin the coaching conversation? How do you end it? What does the questions look like mid-year? How about the end of the year? How do you come back to those? What does 1 hour look like from start to finish? And just gives you a variety of different things to grab onto. And so again, coaching is key and critical to leadership. If you are not leveraging the coaching practice as core to who you are as a leader, then you're probably not extending yourself in the ways you should for your team and for your community. And so step into it.
All right. Well, thank you to Nancy, Michelle, and Michael for sharing such valuable insights with us today. Congratulations again on your
Thank
coaching
you.
education leaders.
We're
It is a
excited.
powerful resource for anyone looking to deepen their impact through culturally responsive coaching. We were debating earlier how to go about getting your copy. For those of you that are inspired to learn more, the book is available through Routledge and other major online retailers. I can confirm it is also on Amazon. I'm not sure if there's a Cyber Monday deal still available today on Tuesday, but I would definitely encourage you to explore it further and continue the journey toward creating more inclusive and equitable school environments. Thank you to all of you that took time to join us. And again, congratulations to all three of you. And have a great week. Take care.
Thank Dr. Siddiqui.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.